Good evening again, folks. Last one for the night. My brain is fried. With all the stuff with Clue TV and all the paperwork that goes into legitimizing a business and getting our lawyers, taken care of and getting the CPA and getting this and that. Christ almighty. And, it's actually really funny because at this point, John and I have pretty much sunk every penny of our savings into this shit. Because even if you don't use an attorney, when you have a business, it's a good idea to keep one on retainer, especially when you do the kind of shit that we do. And, the retainer can be quite high. And I'm going, I can't wait to have my own law license. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about the Keddie Murders because I'm starting to move along the investigation. John and I are starting to gather up some information, and I took some time today to watch the 2 documentaries produced by Keddie 28. And, really good information, excellent information. I need to go through the case file myself. That's going to be fun. What I find interesting is that no suspects were ever arrested. From what I can tell, no true suspect list was ever developed. And yet, Palma County has a whole room dedicated to these murders. Like a room, like they fucking keep it locked. And like you unlock the door and you go in and they've got the timeline up around the edges of the room. And like all the evidence and shit in there. And yet it's never been solved. And I find that really interesting. Now, what I found most interesting is Justin, who was the little friend of the little boys, Sue Sharp's sons, who stayed the night that night. His stepfather, Marty Smart, is like suspect number 1 on mine and many other people's lists. I mean, he looks really fucking good for it. Him and his buddy Bo. And what I find interesting is law enforcement actually found, and this was corroborated by Marty Smart's ex-wife, Justin's mother. Law enforcement found under the house the jacket, Tina's jacket, the little 12-year-old that was missing and was found later, 3 years later in the woods. They found Tina's jacket under Marty Smart's house with blood on it. And they didn't feel the need to arrest his ass. And according to Marilyn, Marty Smart's ex-wife, there was a shack up the road from their cabin. And the kids kind of used it, the neighborhood kids kind of used it as a clubhouse. And she said that shortly after the murders, the floorboards were torn up. Why would the floorboards need to be torn up? Unless there was some shit on them floorboards that nobody wanted found. Like blood and semen. And Justin, the little boy, his shoes were taken from the crime scene, and the cops had told Marilyn that due to the nature of the evidence on the bottom of the shoes, it was obvious that he had walked through the crime scene. So this little child walked through the fucking crime scene. Oh my God! That is horrifying! Now, Marty Smart actually died in 2000 in Portland, Oregon. However, Sheila Sharp got a postcard in 97 telling her that Marty Sharp had died. Who the fuck would have done that? Now, Marty Smart wrote to his wife a postcard about 6 to 7 months after the murders telling her that Bo was dead. In reality, Bo, for all intents and purposes, is still alive in Holiday, Florida. At least we have one suspect alive and ready to go to the chair. Now, the police did collect quite a bit of evidence, a shitload of evidence. And a lot of this evidence that had DNA on it was never tested. God, I hope that shit still exists. I'm going to be having some fun with that. Now, Sue I misspoke. Sue was not covered with just a sheet. She was covered with a sheet and blanket. Now, folks, I don't know how much you know about murder. I unfortunately know a lot. Maybe not so unfortunately. It's kind of a hobby of mine. And any good investigator will tell you that when an attack is this vicious and brutal, it's 9 times out of 10 personal in nature. And when one of the victims has been covered with a blanket, it is because the killer is covering his own guilt. He wants to compartmentalize what he's done. And I say he because the majority of killers, especially mass killers, are male. So don't bust my chops. The FBI does it all the time. So the fact that she was covered with a blanket and a sheet, and she was the only one who was, and get this shit, Sue Sharp was gagged with her own panties. Like, she didn't have any panties on. They took her panties off and stuffed them in her mouth. This is another reason why I believe that Sue Sharp was the initial victim. She was the one that they started on, and I believe that the boys, Johnny and Dana, were not in the home at the time that the attack started. I believe that Sue was the one that they started with. Sue and Tina are the ones that they started with, and Johnny and Dana walked in on the attack because Sue was, first of all, her panties were missing. I don't know if a rape kit was done on her. I'm still trying to find that out. But her panties were taken off. They were stuffed in her mouth as a gag, and her bindings were so tight that, like, the flesh was bulging out over the top of these bindings. And Johnny and Dana's bindings were not nearly as tight, which to me suggests a rush job. It was obvious that they were in a hurry. So there's that. And, you know, the fact that Tina was taken, I mean, come on, that's just weird. That bespeaks of nefarious intentions. Now, Sue, apparently, one of the neighbors that moved out shortly before the murders had seen Sue on the lawn arguing frequently with a man who kind of looked like Marty Smart. And they would argue constantly. And then he moved out, and then, you know, Sue Sharp and her children ended up dead. Now, a local bartender from the lounge on the Keddie resort property had left work at 2:15 a.m. And as he's leaving work, he's hearing something. He's hearing something very strange. And, you know, later he tells his niece, you know, I heard something. It was like a thump, thump, thump. What he was hearing was the murders. He was hearing the bashing of the hammer. So we've got a timeline now. We have an estimated TOD of 2:15 a.m. So let's check that down. Make sure we keep that number in mind, huh? Now, Marty Smart's friend had talked to police, and he talked again with the documentary filmmakers, and he told them that he had been approached by police to see about Marty Smart after the murders, and he said, the only thing I can think of why they would approach me and they would think of Marty is look at the bindings, look at the knots, because Marty Smart is ex-military, and there's some knots that military is trained in because they have to know it, and it becomes second nature to them. So I'm going to be printing up some of those binding pictures because I would love to analyze that shit. Thank God I've got my husband, Daddy Raven, to run that shit by, because he'll be able to tell me a lot more about those bindings. All right, folks, I have got a lot more stuff to cover on the Keddie Murders tomorrow. Thank you all very much for watching. I'll put the link for the GoFundMe campaign down below, as well as the link for cluetv.net. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you next video.